Hey AP Micro, welcome back. This is the last video in the series for perfect competition. And this is we're gonna talk about perfect competition in the long run. The last video highlighted perfect competition, how you graph that in the short run. I'm gonna give you an example what that looks like here in a moment, and then we'll talk about what happens in the long run for perfect competition. All right, so if we look at perfect competition, earning short run economic profits. Right, so how we graph that again, if you recall, whenever you graph perfect competition, you should always graph the industry first. And so we're going to add in our supply, our demand curve. Here's our industry price. Here's our industry quantity. And since the firms are price takers, we're going to add in a perfectly elastic price line. Remember over here, the price is the same thing as demand, the same thing as MR, same thing as average revenue, right? So hopefully you remember why that is as you go through. If you don't remember, I think I mentioned the same thing last video. If you don't remember why this is, you want to go back in the last video. I think it's the last video or the video before that, number 3, to find out why these are actually equal. I think it is video 2 or 3. All right, so once we have this, we need to add in our short run production costs, and this is earning economic profit. So here's my marginal cost. There's your AVC, your average variable cost. And then your ATC will go down. It will get closer to average variable cost as you go through. And remember, as you are doing this, the next step to figure out where we are, you have to find your optimal quantity. So optimal quantity, when you're given this information, you need to use the MR and MC, for marginal analysis. So I want to find out, where does my MR equal my marginal cost? So here's your marginal revenue curve, here's your marginal cost, and I'm just going to go straight down there, and I'm going to put the baby Q on there. Remember over here I have the large Q, the big Q for the industry. I have a baby Q, the small Q for the firm. And again, as I mentioned before, you can do it, you can make a big Q there, it doesn't really matter. That's the way that I learned it, so that's the way that I taught it. And so once we have this, we're going to show us having economic profit. And so you have to find out, here's where the price is at the optimal quantity. Here's where the ATC is at that optimal quantity, and you're going to go straight over, and then you're going to shade that area in. Remember to shade in that bottom triangle. And so now we have shown a perfectly competitive firm in the short run earning economic profits. Right? So one of the things that I wanted to mention, which we kind of ended with in the last video, but I didn't go back and revisit, so I'm going to talk about it here. If you recall, we ended up having the marginal cost curve. You saw an example of that marginal cost curve with an actual dotted line below the AVC, and I'm going to give you the rationale for that now. And really, as you do it, this would be the most correct way to be able to do it, with having the dotted line below the AVC. But if you were to draw these and you don't have that, I don't think it's a huge deal, but it actually shows more of an understanding that you may have for the relationship that marginal cost has with AVC. The reason why it is a dotted line is because, if you recall from the last video, when we talked about when does a perfectly competitive firm produce, or when does any firm produce? Well, the firm's production depends on the relationship between price and AVC. And so if your price would happen to be below your minimum of your AVC here, well, then you were going to shut down. And so if you shut down, you don't have any marginal cost. And so that's why any time that you are below the marginal cost, when it's below this point right here, it ends up becoming a dotted line, because it signifies the fact that if the price were to fall below the minimum of this AVC, you wouldn't have you wouldn't be producing anything. Right, so, but I'm going to show you one other kind of thing to see what this looks like. If I was to add in a price down here, right? So here's where my price is. I'll just put it as P1. Here's what the price is. We know that the price, that would end up being the quantity if we were going to produce there. But remember, since this whole area from here to here would be my loss if I produced, and the area from here to here would be my loss if I actually shut down. So your loss in shutting down is actually less than your loss in producing. So you know that when the price is actually down here, we aren't going to produce, which also means that we are not going to have any marginal costs, any variable costs when we are shutting down. The only cost we will have will be our fixed costs, right? So anyway, so that's I wanted to highlight why the marginal cost below the ABC is typically a dotted line. So I'll see as I go through here and show you other kind of examples. I may do the same exact thing there, but again, if you don't do that, you're not losing points on my exam or the AP exam. What you are showing, though, is a stronger understanding of what the relationship is about production for perfect competition, or really for any kind of competition. All right, so this again is what it looks like in the short run. So in the short run, if you earn profits, we look like if we have a loss, well then we would have to add in any kind of price point below the minimum of your ATC and above the minimum of the AVC. So you will produce at a loss if your price, actually if I do this, if your price is less than ATC, but your price is also greater than AVC. Right, so that is the thought. Anytime your price is below the minimum of this, of ATC, and above the minimum of the AVC, you are going to produce, but you're going to produce at a loss. Right? So because that's going to, anytime you go below the minimum of the ATC, you are losing money. And you can keep doing that as long as you are above the minimum of the AVC. All right, so let's go ahead and get rid of this piece. And again, as always, as I mentioned before, if I go through things a little bit too fast, you can always pause the video to figure out, to finish up things in your notes, to add more content, things of that nature. So it makes it a little bit easier than when you're just in a lecture with me, and then I just quickly go on to the next topic. All right, so there are several different things we have to talk about when we look at the difference, when we look at perfect competition in the short run. So we have to look at two different things. Last chapter, chapter 8. In the production costs, we had short-run production costs, which we just showed you, the marginal cost, ATC, AVC, and also AFC. But we also ended with the long-run production costs, which was that L or ATC, right? So when you look at long-run costs, here's the point of this slide. The point of this slide is I'm going to show you the difference between long-run costs, which is the L or ATC, and perfect competition in the long run. So even though you have the same term called long run, it's actually used differently depending on what the context is. So long run costs really just focus on the ability of a firm to change its fixed cost or to expand, right? That's what long run costs are, right? And so when we look at this, that's when we talked about economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, things of that nature. So if I go in and show you what do long run costs look like, well, it just looks like this. This is an L or ATC, and each of these represents the short run average total cost curve for a business to be able to produce. And then each of these represents I've increased my fixed costs because I've been able to expand. That's long run costs. Now, the difference is in perfect competition, and also in chapter 14 for monopoly, 15, and also 16, we are going to focus more on perfect competition in the long run, or monopoly in the long run, oligopoly in the long run. And so that's different than long run costs. So you need to separate the difference between these. So here's what perfect competition in the long run means. This means what is the ability, or what happens in an industry. Can firms enter or exit the industry? So they're kind of tied together because this talks about expansion, but that's if you currently have a business, you're just looking at expanding. Here, perfect competition in the long run is focusing on can a business enter an industry or can they exit an industry, and how easy is it to do one of the two? So that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to look at we're going to go backwards again and look at what if we look at perfect competition in the short run earning a profit, well, what would happen in the long run? That's what we're going to focus on. And so here's what we focus on. Here's what I just said the word focus on twice. Here's what we will look at. We're going to focus on the profit or loss and the impact on the industry. So my question to you is this, and if you need to, when I ask the question, if you want to pause the video to basically to be able to answer the question, that's great. What happens to in a perfectly competitive industry with the following conditions? So if you have a perfectly competitive industry, and if all of the firms, remember, go back to the very first video, we talked about the different characteristics of perfect competition. One of the characteristics was the number of sellers. Well, we have thousands of sellers in perfect competition. They're all the same exact size, selling the same exact thing because it's a homogeneous product. Well, if we have every single one of those firms earning an economic profit in this industry, well, what's going to happen is other firms are going to want to come into your industry because they want to get a piece of that pie, right? So that's what's going to happen. So when you have an industry that all the firms are making a profit, other firms are on the outside and they want a piece of that, so they try to enter the market. And what that looks like is just firms entering the industry. And so what happened? What is the impact? So let's just say that we have perfect competition in the short run, they're earning profits. Well, what's the impact? If firms are going to come in, how does that impact the industry, market, or supply? So think about that for a minute. We have more sellers entering an industry. So if you need to pause this for a second to see if you can remember back to chapter 3, what it means when sellers enter an industry. Give you a chance to pause. And here's the answer. The supply in that industry is going to increase because if you go back and if you remember supply and demand, right? So when you look at supply and demand, what actually happens is the supply curve increases when other firms enter your industry, which means that is going to lower the overall price in that industry because that's exactly what happens in a supply-demand curve when your supply increases. It shifts to the right and it lowers the price. Increases quantity, lowers the price. Well, what happens if you have an economic loss? If every single firm in your industry is actually losing money, well, what it actually means then is that some firms in that industry, some firms, are going to exit the industry. Now, once we focus on these two different things, we have to go back to the characteristics of perfect competition. There was one characteristic that talked about free entry or free exit, or just entry and exit. In perfect competition, there are no barriers to entry or exit, which means there's nothing really preventing firms from coming in or leaving. And so if you end up having a profit or a loss, firms will exit and enter the industry seamlessly. It's free entry or free exit. But we're going to learn next chapter that doesn't happen in a monopoly, right? You just don't have firms entering the industry because we have huge barriers to entry. Because as a monopoly, we only have one firm, right? So if we have an economic loss, what is the impact now on the industry and market? So again, if you want to get the answer to that question, pause it for a second. The answer to what is the impact on the industry, the market supply when firms exit the industry? Well, supply now decreases because firms are exiting the industry. We have fewer sellers in the market. The quantity is going to go down, but the price is going to increase. And I'm going to graph this a little bit to show you what this ends up looking like. This is a really key piece of understanding what happens in the long run, specifically for perfect competition for right now. So I'm going to show you some samples of what this looks like for perfect competition moving from the short run to the long run. Again, you're going to need to pause this at different points to be able to see what I'm actually graphing. My big melon may be getting in the way of some of the graphs to help you see that. Well, this side over here is going to be our industry for both of these. This side over here is going to be the firm for both these situations. So let's do this to the profit one first. And if you recall, when I started this video, this is what I first graphed. So I'll do this quickly because I'm not going to explain the entire process because we just did it. So then you can kind of see what the sample is. And if you want to, you could actually pause your video and see if you can add this to your notes to see if you did it correctly. That would be a heck of an idea. All right, so here we go. Here's our supply. Here's our demand, industry price, industry quantity, ... We are a price taker. So now I have my price over here. Perfectly elastic MR, demand, and average revenue. And if we are making a profit, we've got marginal cost. We've got AVC. And here's my ATC. Now I have to find the optimal quantity. Optimal quantity is where MR equals MC. I add my baby Q in there. Now we have to find out and show where the profit is. Well, if this is the difference. Here's the price. Actually, you know what? I'm not even going to shade this because I want to make sure that it doesn't get too messy when we actually take it to the long run. So I'm just going to leave it the way that it is right here. I'm just going to say over here, that's the baby Q, that's an SR. If it's too small for you to see the video, that's the SR for short run. So this is what it looks like in the short run when I'm making a profit. So long story short, I'm going to go to the, talk something about, I was going to say at the end, perfect competition, if they're making a profit or a loss, they're in the short run, right? The short run means just kind of what's going on right now. And then in the long run, like over time, we're going to see that in the long run, what's going to happen next. So both of these instances are showing a firm in the short run. They're either profitable or they're losing money. Well, here's what happens. If we know that all of these firms are making a profit, you know just from the last slide that the supply curve has to increase as firms are coming in. The question is, how much does it increase? So here's my advice for you. Instead of you drawing the supply curve first, what my advice is firms are going to continue entering the industry, and my question to you is, when do they stop? So I'll kind of go through a couple different stages here, and then I'll kind of ask a question, then we'll get to the big picture. Well, actually, I'll go to the end, sorry, and then I'll kind of go backwards again. So what happens in the long run is firms will continue entering the industry as long as there are profits to be had. So the question would be, when do they stop entering the industry? And they stop entering the industry when there is zero profit. Because if there's zero profit means there's no incentive to come in the industry because there's no profit ahead, and there's no incentive to leave the industry because zero economic profit means, from a couple videos ago, it means that you are making enough revenue to cover all of your economic costs, your explicit and your implicit costs. So you are in a great situation. It'd be better if you had an economic profit, but if you're at zero economic profit, right, there's no incentive to exit or leave. So you're going to see my supply curve is going to keep moving over and increasing until we reach long-run equilibrium, which is at zero profit. So here's what you do. Before, again, you shift the supply curve, add in, and I'm just going to put the SR and LR over here, add in a new price line so it is at the minimum of the ATC. Well, now I have to go my ... over. Well, now this is my intersection point, so I know that my supply curve is going to shift here, and so that creates a new price and a new quantity. Quantity went up because we have more sellers in the industry, so the overall industry quantity goes up, but the price that each firm gets actually decreases. So the price in the industry decreases. You can see that happening down here. This is going up. And then here, this is going down, right? And then for each of these firms, each of the firms are going to sell less. Now look at the connection between here. In the industry, the overall quantity goes up, but each firm actually sells fewer units. And hopefully that makes sense to you. Because the more competition that you come in, well, that means that the consumers now are splitting up between 1, 2, 3, 4 more competitors. That means each competitor actually is receiving or actually producing and selling fewer units. All right, so now this is what it looks like in perfect competition, going from the short run, making a profit, and now this is what would happen in the long run. Firms would continue entering until they actually get to the point of the price line being at the minimum of the ATC. Because remember, if the price is equal to ATC, you have made zero profit. And I'm going to ask another follow-up question for you. What term means the same thing as zero profit? This is from a couple slides ago. Zero profit is the same thing as making a normal profit. So if you are a business and if you have a problem, the problem says this perfectly competitive firm, Anderson Incorporated, is earning a normal profit, well, that means that they're actually at zero profit and they're in the long run. Because firms making a profit or loss, that means in the short run. If a firm is in the long run, they have to be making zero profit. So that's the separator, the difference between this. So that's the example of making profits. Now what happens if we have losses? Well, if we have losses, I'm going to add in our new a different supply and demand curve. Just because of the angle that I'm at, I apologize if my lines aren't quite as straight. My price, and then your MR, your demand, your AR. So your Mr. DARP is in here. And I'll add in my marginal cost. I will add in my AVC. And now I have to add in, whoops, I went a little bit too far. I have to add in my ATC. And you can see the minimum of this is up here. Right, so what you have to find is, now I have to find my optimal quantity. The optimal quantity for any firm. Perfect competition, monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic, it does not matter. The profit maximizing optimal quantity is where MR equals MC. And so this is in the short run, so what you would have to do is go straight up, because it's the difference between your price, between the price and where your ATC is. So that dotted line there. And so then we would go straight over, and then that area, that whole area would be your loss. Remember, your loss is the difference between price and ATC times quantity. That's where I would shade in that whole rectangle. I don't shade that piece in, right? But I shade in the other area. So now all of these firms have an economic loss. And from the last slide, it just said what happens to the perfectly competitive industry if all the firms are actually losing money. If all the firms are losing money, then firms are going to exit the industry. Not all firms, some firms. And so which firms exit? Probably the smaller firms, because the smaller firms can't afford to keep losing money. And so the bigger firms are going to stay, the smaller firms are going to exit. And I know, and I'm giving you, that's more of a realistic example, because you may have just said to yourself, hey, wait, Anderson, in perfect competition, aren't all the firms the same exact size? Yes. And so it's harder for me to explain the fact of how do they make the decision of which ones go? Do you play rock, paper, scissors? Let's just assume that in reality what happens is the small firms are the one that actually leaves. So in this case here, for perfect competition, some firms leave the industry. Maybe if they're all the same size, some decide that it's not worth it for them to continue producing at a loss. So we're going to say that. And so what happens now is the same step that we did back here. We have to now figure out that firms are leaving, and firms are going to continue leaving as long as they're losing money. So if I was to shift the supply curve left, because that's what happens when firms exit the industry. If I shift the supply curve left, if I only shift it a little bit and my price ends up being here, well, firms are still losing money. So I have to keep shifting the supply curve until I get the point of zero profit, which is at the minimum of the ATC. So again, draw a new price line in here, and that's your long run price. And so now we have a new quantity. Here's the baby Q in the long run, and a new price in the long run. So here, the price that each firm is going to get, and actually I need to come over here and go dot, 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 dot. Here's the intersection point, and so I have to add in a new supply curve. This is chapter 3, what happens when firms exit an industry, what happens when they enter an industry, and now we're using chapter 3 and we're adding it into chapter 9, we're transferring that knowledge. And so my quantity for each good would actually increase. Why? Because when firms exit your industry, now I have fewer competitors. So when I have fewer competitors, the actual price goes up, and the quantity that each firm sells actually goes up as well. Right? So this is what it looks like, folks, when you want to move from the short run to the long run. And if you need more time to process this, if you want to go back and rewind this, you can pause it so you don't lose this here. But what we're going to look at now is what happens if you actually start in the long run and then you move to the short run. Okay, so let's look at what that example is going to be. after I get everything erased here, hopefully that is everything. I don't know what that blue line is down there. It must be on my it must be on the actual slide itself. All right, so if we look at this example, ignore these two for right now, because what we're doing is we're going to take perfect competition. You may have a story that says, hey, your firm is currently earning a normal profit. Currently earning a normal profit. That means it's currently in the long run making a zero profit. And now something happened in the industry to cause firms to make a profit, or something happened in the industry to make the firms lose money. And so we're going to go through what it looks like from the opposite viewpoint of perfect competition, starting in the long run and then moving to the short run. So again, here's my industry, and here is a supply, demand. You've got your price, you have your quantity. Here's my price line, MR, demand, AR. And remember here, I have to draw this. You have to draw this so the firm is currently earning zero profit. And you earn a zero profit when price is equal to ATC, because that's how you find profit, price and ATC. And so what I would do is this. I want to make sure, you can see how I did that? If you didn't see how I did that, stop this, rewind it, do it again. So, play it again and see how I drew that. I started here, and I went backwards, and then I went forwards, because it's easier to do that than actually starting here and trying to end at that point. And so this way you're allowed to be, you can be a little more precise when you do this. Well, now, here's my quantity. I'm in the long run because I'm making zero profits. But now I want to go to the short run, and I want to earn profits in the short run. So what would happen here? Let's just say, for example, most of the time what you're going to find is that something happened to actually shift the market. And so let's just use on the demand side. On the demand side, we have to have something happen on the demand side that actually raises the price. Well, what that's going to be is it could be that you have an increase in the demand. So go back to chapter 3 and think about what different things increase demand. Well, different things that increase demand would be the inept things, right? Income went up in society. This is a normal good. We expect the price of things to be higher in the future, so we increase our demand right now, right? The price of a substitute actually increases. So all these different inept things would cause my demand curve to actually shift right. Well, now I have a new price point, and I add in a new line here. This is going to be the short run. And now I have a new quantity, and that's going to be in the short run. And now each of those firms is earning a short run profit. Right, so we went from the long run first to the short run. Right, so we can do the same exact thing down here. And again, if it's not quite clicking, pause this, rewind it, listen to it again, and to see if anything else sticks out to you. Because at the same time I'm doing this, you're trying to take notes. And so it's a little bit challenging for you to do that sometimes. So let's go back and do, again, we're going to start with our long run. So here's our supply, here's our demand, price, quantity. We again have to give this, we have to add our marginal cost in here. We are going to add in our AVC. And again, we have to start in the long run. So I am going to start here at this point, because this is where I know this is my quantity, because that's where MR equals MC. So if you were confused about why I went there, well, remember, we still are trying to maximize profit, whether it's a short run or the long run. And so if you do that, you have to go to where MR equals MC. So that's why I'm going to MR and MC. And now I'm going to go backwards. And then I'm going to go forwards and have that be the ATC. So now this is showing a perfectly competitive firm in the long run, which is what that states right there. But now I have to show something that happened in the industry to actually show these firms having a loss in the short run. Well, let's do the opposite of this. Let's just take the demand and take your demand down here. And so my demand is actually shifting left, and so it's decreasing. I have a new quantity, Q1 and P1. But whenever you decrease demand, quantity and price both drop. I didn't do that up here, so I guess I should have added those in, right? So we go backwards here. And now we have to add in our new price line for the firms because we are price takers. Right, and now I have my new quantity line. That's the short run. This is the long run, or P and P1, or like I did over here. I guess I could change these and just say this is P1 and this is Q1. You know, however you want to do this, perfectly fine. But now I have all these firms losing money, and in the problem they would probably ask you to shade in the loss, and they shade in the profit. So I have to go straight up to that ATC. Remember that profit is the difference between price and ATC. That's where profit is. So price, ATC, and now I have to go over to get to it, and now this whole area up to my dotted line, right, that's going to be where your profit is. Right? So now we have successfully shown perfect competition in the long run. Starting in the short run, going to the long run, starting in the long run, going to the short run. Right, and so that's really some key things for you to be able to look at. And again, as you go through, rewind this, pause it, rewind it, start it up again to figure out what what learning you missed, or if it's making sense. That's great. As you go through here, you'll do some other check your understandings. You'll do some handouts. Right, there's just a few more different things that I want to be able to show you through here. And here's one. And I'm not going to draw this. I have a couple images here. And if you look at these images, you see, well, why the heck are there two different things here? Because this is an example of a firm that is, if this here, this is D1 and S1. And so look at what's happening here. This is where my price is. So this is the initial price. So ask yourself, what's happening in this industry under just S1 and D1? Well, in this industry, my price is at the minimum of the ATC, so it means it must be starting in the long run. And then it says it's taking you to short run profits. Well, what happens here? Do you see this arrow? This arrow is going this way. So now we have a price up here. So this is what's happening first. It's showing a demand curve increasing, which leads to a new quantity in all the firms making money. And then it says show it going back to the long run. So we started in the long run with zero profits. Something happened to change the demand. Our demand increased. Now all the businesses are making a profit. Well, when all the businesses are making a profit, eventually in the long run, that other firms will enter the industry, which is what this is, S1 to S2. Here's the arrow here. And so when those firms enter, we go straight back down to the original spot. And so this is a little bit confusing to be able to look at when you see, almost like a double shift here, but this is taking turns. We started with S1 and D1, and then we went to S1 and D2, and then we went to S2 and D2. That was the progression, right? So here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. And so there's like a step-by-step process of what happens. And this is a little bit easier if you understand the first two. And now, you're never going to be asked to show going the profit again or something. But this is an example of what happens if you start in the long run and you show what happens in that long run and now take it back to the short run and then go to the long run again, right? This is an example of what it looks like if you want to go from the long run first, S1 and D1, right? That's S3. S1 and D1, we are making a zero profit here. And so that means at zero profit, something has to happen. Let's say our demand actually goes down. That's going to drop the price. And so my price is now dropped down. Results in every single firm losing money. When firms lose money, your supply has to actually decrease. And so your supply decreasing means that the price is going to go back up to where S3 and D3 are here. It goes back up to where the minimum of the ATC is, where marginal cost intersects with that, and And then so now you end up with zero profit again. Right? You end up with that zero profit. All right, so that is a big piece. That's a lot of information. I do have a few more different things to hit in this video. I know this video is just getting a little bit long, but it's because it's a little bit challenging to talk about this long run as it goes through. So I'm just going to show you these. I'm not going to do much explanation here, but these are just different kind of conditions. So what different things have to be true to be in long run equilibrium? Well, first off, all the firms have to have zero economic profit. The price has to equal the short run average total cost curve, so just the ATC. If that's the case, no firms want to enter or exit. Firms have to produce the profit maximizing output where price equals marginal cost, right? And so if that's the case, there's no incentive to produce more or less output. All right, so that's when you have long run equilibrium. And again, you can go back, you can kind of pause this to get more of the information. Here's the efficiency piece. This is, I have a couple minutes left of this. Efficiency, there are two different types of efficiency that we have talked about in this class. One of them starts with an A, the other one starts with a P, right? What are they? All right, so someone in the class right now is yelling out allocative and productive. All right, so we have allocatively efficient and productively efficient. We need to talk about these two different types of efficiency and how it pertains to perfect competition. We're showing a graph right here. There's two different graphs. This is a perfectly competitive firm earning an economic profit. This is a perfectly competitive firm at long run equilibrium. Right? So we have two different things going on. Well, let's talk about those two different types of efficiencies, and then we'll identify what's actually happening here. And then you'll be able to add some different things in your notes to help it make a whole lot more sense. And I'll have you circle some things and highlight some things. When a firm is productively efficient, and we talked about this just a little while ago, not on these slides, but in the last chapter, productive efficiency is when firms are minimizing their average cost of producing the goods. That means they are producing at the minimum point of the ATC. If a firm is productively efficient, their output is at the minimum of the ATC. Well, if we want to figure out which one of these two firms is productively efficient, well, here's MR and MC. And now I go down at 9. Well, my price is above my ATC. So I am not producing at the minimum of the ATC. I'm not minimizing my average cost per unit. And so a perfectly competitive firm is NOT, not productively efficient. Because they're not producing the minimum of the ATC, but in the long run, look at where their price is. Their long run, their price is at the minimum of the ATC. And when the MR equals MC, when the quantity is at the minimum of the ATC, that's productively efficient. So a perfectly competitive firm, we're not talking about the industry, a perfectly competitive firm is productively efficient only, capital letters, in the long run. Because that's the only time a perfectly competitive firm is producing at the minimum of the ATC. Allocatively efficient is the other one. Allocative efficiency is when your optimal quantity, when the actual quantity you're producing is where the demand equals marginal cost, right? So we know that's the case, and here's a couple of reasons why we know that. Because what you're doing is if you go back and remember we talked about marginal cost and marginal benefit, well, the demand curve is just like your marginal benefit. And so if you are producing, we're at the intersection of demand and marginal cost, that's allocative efficiency. Well, here's the difference. Here's marginal cost. In perfect competition, my demand curve is just perfectly elastic, right? And so if your firm is producing the correct amount or the amount of goods that is most wanted by society, you are allocatively efficient. The demand curve, which is your price and your MR, that represents the willingness of the consumer. So if my marginal cost, if the quantity that I am making it as a business, when that equals the actual demand curve, that means that I am producing the allocative efficient quantity. And so at this point right here, wherever I produce at MR and MC, you are allocatively efficient. And so if we look here in the short run, a perfectly competitive firm is going to always be allocatively efficient. In the long run, they are also allocatively efficient because your marginal cost, they're producing where their marginal cost equals their demand curve. Remember that MR is your demand. And so that's where my quantity is. And so the end result is that we end up producing an allocative efficient quantity in the short run and the long run if you're in perfect competition. And so I just added a couple of extra points down here. You can go back and kind of review what that is. You can pause the video if you want to add those different things. Those are different points we've talked about in the past. And so really to kind of to think about three conclusions about long-run equilibrium is that the conclusions about the cost of production and efficiency in the long-run equilibrium of a perfectly competitive industry. First off, the firm must have, their price must be the minimum of the ATC and have zero profits. So that's one. Secondly, and again, if I'm going too fast, pause the video. Secondly, the firm is producing the productively efficient quantity because they're producing the quantity which is at the minimum of the ATC. And third, along with having zero profits, being productively efficient, they are also allocatively efficient because they're producing the quantity that is most wanted by society, where demand equals marginal cost. Right? So big piece, big conclusion. That took a while to kind of get through, about 40 minutes to get through, to get to this one point right here. So very quickly, if we go through just to show you a sample of this, and I think you may have this in here. In the short run, for perfect competition, the price is either greater than ATC or the price is less than ATC. In the long run, price is equal to ATC. And so actually, maybe what I'll do is you should actually pause the video, complete this table to see if you understand this stuff, and then you can start the video again to see me actually go through it. So I'll give you a second to pause it. I kind of jumped ahead, and keep doing the rest of the stuff that I'm doing. So pause. All right, we're unpaused, and we're gonna keep going. Efficiency. I apologize. Efficiency. That's a horribly spelled word. I apologize. Don't show Miss Wahlberg. All right, efficiency in the short run, we are allocatively efficient, right? Allocatively. And in the long run, we are allocatively and productively efficient. Profit or loss, we have both. Right? I'm just going to say we have a profit and or a loss. So I'll just say not both. I'll say either. Either or, and profit or loss over here has to be zero. No profit, no loss. So you have zero profit in the long run in perfect competition. Output, we produce the output if we're going to be a profit maximizing firm, where MR equals MC, and over here, we produce where MR equals MC. All right, so that's your conclusions about comparison, contrasting in between perfect competition in the short run, perfect competition in the long run. And folks, you know what? We have gotten to the end of the perfectly competitive videos. And so the next thing that you have is you have a check your understanding. You have some handouts to do, maybe an activity to do. So good luck with perfect competition. Until later, peace.